Melissa Anderson had always believed in the quiet kind of love, the type that doesn't explode into your life like a storm, but rather tiptoes and gently, like a sunrise. She was 27 when she met Ryan Moore, the enigmatic and sharply dressed CEO of Morepoint Developments. At the time, Melissa was working full-time as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital, admired by her peers for her soft heart and unwavering dedication to her young patients. Her life was modest but fulfilling, shaped by a small-town upbringing in Vermont, where she was raised by her late father, Douglas Anderson, a retired firefighter, and her mother, Lillian, a school teacher battling early-onset Alzheimer's. She had one sibling, Ethan Anderson, 2 years younger, fiercely loyal and studying engineering at MIT. Melissa had known struggle all her life, balancing work, caring for her ailing mother, and dreaming quietly of one day starting a children's developmental center that merged play therapy and medical care. She never had time for parties, which made her attendance at Janelle's birthday event, her closest friend since high school, so out of character that it felt like fate had a hand in what would follow. It was at that rooftop party in Cambridge that Melissa first saw Ryan. He stood out instantly, charismatic, precise, and surrounded by men in suits and women with manicured confidence. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, his gaze found her across the room. She was in a simple navy blue dress, her curls tucked loosely beneath a headband, unaware that she'd just caught the attention of one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. Ryan approached her without the arrogance his reputation carried, and instead of leading with status, he asked her a question that caught her off guard. "Do you like stars or sunsets?" She laughed, unsure how to answer, and replied, "Depends on what kind of day I've had." That first conversation lasted hours. He walked her to her car. They didn't kiss, but the tension between them was undeniable. In the days that followed, Ryan sent handwritten notes, one tucked inside a book of children's poems, another slid into her hospital locker. He wasn't like the men she'd known before. He was composed but unpredictable, focused but attentive. Melissa was drawn in slowly, like a tide inching closer to the shore. What Melissa didn't know then was that Ryan's pursuit of her wasn't just attraction, it was fascination. Ryan had grown up surrounded by wealth and emptiness. His father, Charles Moore, was a ruthless businessman who once fired an employee at a family Christmas party. His mother, Margaret, never smiled unless there was a camera in front of her. Ryan, despite the world handed to him, had never known real connection. He dated women who were accessories to his lifestyle, who praised his ambition but never challenged his soul. Melissa was different, grounded, warm, and unafraid to speak plainly. She didn't flinch when he told her about his cold childhood. She didn't fawn over his money. Instead, she made him listen, made him laugh, made him human. Their courtship moved quickly, weekend trips to the Berkshires, nights spent cooking pasta in her tiny kitchen, afternoons reading to children in the pediatric ward. When he told her he was falling in love with her, she said, "You don't have to fall. Just stay." And so he did. Or at least, that's what she believed. What neither of them realized was that love without truth, no matter how bright it begins, cannot survive the darkness waiting just around the bend. Melissa's life had never been dipped in luxury or pampered by comfort, but what her upbringing lacked in extravagance, it made up for in depth, love, and resilience. After her father's tragic death from a heart attack when she was just 19, Melissa had become the de facto pillar of the Anderson household. Her mother, Lillian, once vivacious and full of poetry, had already begun showing signs of memory loss. The diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's came like a thunderclap, unwelcome, cruel, and irreversible. Melissa, still in nursing school, took on multiple jobs, bartending on weekends and assisting elderly patients at home, while her brother Ethan, then only 16, struggled silently with the weight of grief and instability. Yet through all of it, the bond between the siblings only grew stronger. Ethan, now a graduate mechanical engineer and design consultant, often said it was Melissa's quiet strength and unwavering compassion that saved their family from collapse. Their small 2-bedroom apartment in Quincy held more heart than many mansions, and though bills were often paid late and groceries were stretched thin, their household thrived in spirit and unity. Janelle Roberts had been Melissa's best friend since middle school, the girl who sat beside her in science class and shared her lunch when Melissa forgot hers. Janelle was the thunder to Melissa's rain, bold and outspoken, with wild ideas and a protective streak that could scare off wolves. She worked as a digital media strategist and lived just a block away from Melissa in an apartment filled with plants and framed quotes about liberation and truth. Janelle never trusted easily, and she had a radar for insincerity that could slice through charm like a knife through silk. From the beginning, she was skeptical of Ryan. "He's got smooth eyes and steel in his chest," she once whispered to Melissa during an early double date. But Melissa, blinded by love and novelty, dismissed it. Janelle never pushed the issue. She believed in letting people see truth for themselves. Still, she remained a steady presence, calling daily, checking in on Lillian, and making Ethan laugh with conspiracy theories about their old high school principal being in the witness protection program. For Melissa, Janelle and Ethan weren't just family, they were her lifeline. Ryan, on the other hand, came from a world Melissa could barely relate to. Raised in a gated estate in Chestnut Hill, his family name was printed on the plaques of libraries and university lecture halls. His mother, Margaret Moore, descended from old Boston money, was known for her icy demeanor and elitist ideals. She smiled often in public but rarely in private, especially not at Melissa. From the first moment they met, Margaret's disdain was paper-thin and poorly disguised. She saw Melissa's kindness as weakness, her profession as unimpressive, and her background as a blemish on the Moore legacy. During an early dinner at the Moore estate, Margaret casually asked Melissa if she'd ever considered finding a more refined career, something less messy. Ryan's silence at that moment was Melissa's first sting of loneliness in their relationship. She never spoke of it again, but it nestled quietly in her heart. Ryan's father, Charles Moore, was rarely home, spending months at a time in Europe or Dubai managing international properties. He was colder than Margaret and nearly invisible. Ryan, though trying to bridge his two worlds, often failed to protect Melissa from the subtle slights and offhand cruelty from his family. He wanted Melissa to adapt, to evolve, not realizing she was already more evolved than anyone in that room. The cracks between their backgrounds weren't just cultural, they were emotional chasms that widened with time, and Melissa, though calm and composed, began to feel the cold seep in. Melissa had always dreamed of building something of her own, something permanent and deeply personal. Ever since her rotation at the Children's Rehabilitation Center during nursing school, she envisioned a place where children with developmental challenges could receive medical care, therapy, and play-based learning under one roof. She called it the Willow Nest, and though it was only scribbled on notepads and sketched in her mind, it was the beating heart of her aspirations. Ryan listened attentively the first time she spoke about it, nodding as she explained sensory rooms, hydrotherapy pools, and a quiet garden for parents. But as months passed and their lives intertwined further, he began nudging her toward his world instead. "You could lead pediatric wellness initiatives through my company's charity arm," he once suggested, casually pouring wine. "It'll give you structure and access to bigger platforms." Melissa smiled, but something in her sank. She didn't want a charity gig under Ryan's umbrella. She wanted to build something with her hands, her name, her soul. Yet love, in its early glow, makes even sacrifices look noble. And so, slowly, she let the idea drift further away, believing Ryan's world would make space for hers someday. Ryan's ambition was unrelenting. He was consumed by expansion, pushing more point developments into territories previously dominated by legacy builders, launching vertical communities, and proposing tech-integrated smart housing. His mind never rested, not even in bed beside Melissa. He'd rise in the middle of the night to jot down ideas on his phone or sketch plans for new towers. When Melissa would suggest a weekend getaway or even a simple picnic in the park, he'd smile distractedly, kiss her forehead, and whisper, "Just after this deal, baby." The deals never stopped. His phone was always ringing, even during dinner. There were weeks he wouldn't come home until midnight, and when he did, he smelled of cologne and fatigue. Melissa began scheduling their time together like a business proposal, hoping he'd confirm. At first, she felt guilty for feeling lonely. She reminded herself he was building a legacy, something they'd both benefit from. But eventually, she realized she was becoming a placeholder in his life, convenient, constant, but background noise to his booming ambition. Her laughter didn't seem to reach him anymore. Her thoughts felt like whispers in a boardroom full of roaring executives. One evening, after a long shift at the hospital and barely a text from Ryan in 2 days, Melissa came home to find a sleek architectural blueprint sprawled across their dining table. It was for a new luxury development in the Bay Area, something Ryan had never even discussed with her. She stood there for minutes, absorbing the unfamiliar names and layouts, feeling like a stranger in her own home. When Ryan walked in, still on a Bluetooth call, he kissed her cheek distractedly and mouthed, "I'll be off in 5." She waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. When he finally hung up, she confronted him gently. "Why didn't you tell me you're expanding to California?" He waved it off. "Didn't want to bother you with business stress." She nodded but felt herself drifting. That night, she stared at her old sketches for the Willow Nest, tucked beneath a pile of unread mail. The woman who once dreamed of changing lives was slowly fading, and the man who once saw her light now only saw his own shadow cast larger and louder. What Melissa hadn't realized yet was that some sacrifices don't elevate love, they erase parts of you until you're unrecognizable, even to yourself. Vanessa Blake entered Ryan's orbit during the development of the Eastview Skyline project, a sleek, high-rise luxury complex aimed at rebranding Boston's skyline. Vanessa was stunning in an intimidating way, tall, effortlessly elegant, with eyes that sparkled like glass but never quite revealed anything real. She was sharp, efficient, and always 2 steps ahead in meetings. Her resume was impeccable: degrees in urban planning and business administration, internships in New York, and endorsements from major tech developers. But it was her ability to read Ryan's moods and rhythms that quickly made her indispensable. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them, adjusted presentations to match his cadence, and subtly began curating his public image. To outsiders, she was simply an exceptional assistant. But to those who paid attention, people like Janelle and Ethan, Vanessa was far too present, far too seamless, and far too invested. The first time Melissa met her, Vanessa extended a hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So nice to finally meet the woman who slows Ryan down," she said, and Melissa didn't miss the glint of passive hostility behind her polished tone. It wasn't jealousy Melissa felt, it was something deeper, something that whispered, "This woman is not just a colleague." Vanessa's private life was shrouded in layers of curated perfection. She lived alone in a chic 2-bedroom condo on Newberry Street, filled with modern art and muted furniture. Her social media pages showed just enough to suggest sophistication without intimacy: an occasional glass of wine on a rooftop, a photo at a networking gala, never with friends or family. She had once been engaged to a London-based hedge fund manager who broke it off 6 months before their wedding. Since then, she had vowed never to be second choice again. Her cousin Tiffany, bold and brash, was the only one who truly knew Vanessa's obsession with being irreplaceable. "You don't want love," Tiffany once said over drinks, "you want control." Vanessa smirked, sipping her Cabernet. "Same difference," she replied. She didn't see Melissa as a rival in the traditional sense. She saw her as an obstacle, a sweet, unambitious nurse clinging to Ryan's time and emotion. Vanessa convinced herself that Melissa didn't understand Ryan the way she did. Where Melissa saw exhaustion, Vanessa saw hunger. Where Melissa asked him to slow down, Vanessa fueled his pace. Every time Melissa called during a strategy meeting, Vanessa's smile grew colder. Ethan, always quietly observant, was the first to raise concerns. He had noticed Ryan's increasing absence, the delayed replies to Melissa's texts, and how Vanessa's name started appearing in conversations far too often. One afternoon, while helping Melissa clear out her storage unit, Ethan confronted her gently. "Have you ever asked Ryan about Vanessa?" Melissa, caught off guard, laughed nervously. "She's his assistant, Ethan." But her eyes betrayed unease. Ethan didn't push, but the seed had been planted. A week later, after Ryan skipped dinner again due to a late client meeting, Ethan followed him. What he saw was not criminal, not even overtly romantic, but it was intimate: Ryan and Vanessa at a private restaurant booth, laughing, leaning in too close, her hand casually grazing his wrist. Ethan took a photo, not for proof, but for Melissa's eyes, should she ever be ready. He knew his sister. She forgave easily, loved deeply, and rarely wanted to believe the worst. But love, when too trusting, can become blind. And Ethan, who had watched Melissa bend, compromise, and slowly erase herself for Ryan, wasn't about to watch her break without warning. What no one realized yet was that Vanessa was not only infiltrating Ryan's world, she was preparing to take it. One step, one smirk, one perfectly timed text message at a time. The engagement party was nothing short of a spectacle, held at the Galleria Ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza. where crystal chandeliers bathed the room in soft light and every surface shimmered with gold accents and floral arrangements flown in from Italy. Ryan had insisted on orchestrating every detail, as though their love needed to be validated by grandeur. He called it a celebration of forever, but to Melissa, something about the entire affair felt detached from their intimacy, more like a press release than a promise. Still, she wore the champagne silk gown he picked, smiled for the photographers he hired, and held onto his hand tightly as a sea of unfamiliar faces offered congratulations. Her family, Ethan, Janelle, and their mother Lillian, who was lucid for that brief evening, stood quietly off to one side, surrounded by a crowd they didn't belong to. Melissa clung to their presence like a lifeline in a sea of strangers. What she didn't expect, however, was the sudden arrival of a storm cloaked in velvet, Vanessa. She entered alone, confident and perfectly timed, dressed in a midnight blue backless gown that shimmered with the subtlest audacity. Heads turned. Even Ryan hesitated. Melissa's smile faltered only slightly when she saw her. Vanessa walked directly toward them, extended a gift box, and said, "For the couple who redefines power." There was something in her tone, sarcastic? Applauding? Melissa couldn't tell. Ryan looked at her, briefly, then laughed in that forced, high-pitched way he always did when discomfort crept up his spine. Janelle, across the room, narrowed her eyes like a hawk. She excused herself from Ethan and beelined toward Melissa, whispering through clenched teeth, "Why is she here?" Melissa responded with a weak shrug, her voice uncertain. Ryan said the team was invited. Janelle's eyes darkened. That's not just team. That's territory. But Melissa, ever the peacemaker, didn't want to ruin the night. So she smiled. She posed. She thanked guests and cut the cake. But inside, she felt like a guest at her own engagement, an ornament polished for display. As the evening progressed, Melissa noticed subtle moments, Vanessa refilling Ryan's drink before the servers could, brushing lint from his lapel, laughing a beat too long at his stories. No one else seemed to question it, or maybe they did and simply chose to stay silent. Melissa began to feel like a shadow beside her own fiancé. Every time she attempted to engage him in conversation, he was whisked away by investors, media guests, or Vanessa herself. When the toast finally came, Ryan clinked his glass and gave a speech that started with the architecture of trust and ended with the foundations of ambition. He thanked his team, his mentors, even Vanessa, before mentioning Melissa. And to Melissa, my calm in the chaos, my reason to come home. The words sounded rehearsed, hollow, like reading a script from memory. The applause was loud, but Janelle's hand gripped Melissa's wrist gently. "He didn't look at you once," she said. Melissa nodded slowly, her smile frozen in place. That night, while undressing in silence, Melissa stared at her reflection. She looked beautiful. She looked engaged. She looked like a woman who should be happy. But deep in her chest, something unsettled stirred, a quiet, invisible crack no one else could see. Not yet. Their wedding day was breathtaking, exactly what fairy tales promised and movies tried to replicate. It was held in a garden estate in Martha's Vineyard, where cascading wisteria formed a floral canopy above guests and the air smelled of sea salt and roses. Melissa wore a long-sleeved lace gown, vintage and regal, with her curls pinned up in soft waves. Ryan looked dashing in a bespoke ivory tuxedo with cufflinks engraved with their initials. Every detail was immaculate. But what stood out to Melissa was not the grandeur, but the quiet moments, the way Ethan teared up as he gave her away, the way her mother, in one of her rare lucid spells, whispered, "He better never hurt you," and Janelle's tight hug before she walked down the aisle. Ryan's vows were articulate and composed, crafted with poetic precision, promising honor and protection and partnership. Melissa's voice trembled as she spoke hers, her words raw and unrehearsed, filled with emotion and unguarded honesty. They kissed beneath the chandelier of flowers, and for that fleeting moment, it truly felt like a new beginning. Love, despite the shadows, still felt possible. In the months that followed, Melissa moved into Ryan's sleek penthouse overlooking the Charles River. The transition was jarring. Her cozy two-bedroom apartment had been filled with photos, post-it notes, and the comforting scent of lavender and cinnamon tea. Ryan's home, by contrast, was minimalist, cold in color palette, and meticulously organized, more like a luxury showroom than a place lived in. She tried to make it hers. She added framed photos of her and her mother, brought in her favorite throw blankets, and placed her nursing books beside his architecture journals. But slowly, her touches disappeared. Ryan's cleaning staff began reorganizing her spaces, the photos were replaced with abstract art, and the books quietly moved to a hidden cabinet. Melissa felt the erasure but said nothing. She believed marriage was about blending. She told herself she was just adjusting, compromising. Vanessa, however, did not blend in quietly. She was always there, at meetings, dinners, lunches, and somehow always managed to text Ryan just before Melissa suggested a date night or quiet weekend. Company crisis, Ryan would sigh, grabbing his coat, while Melissa stood holding a bowl of popcorn they would never share. Margaret Moore, now her mother-in-law, became more pronounced in her coldness. She would visit unannounced, criticize Melissa's housekeeping despite the staff, and make backhanded compliments like, "You're trying, that's what matters." At one family luncheon, Margaret introduced Melissa to a guest as Ryan's wife, the nurse, with a forced smile that felt like mockery. Melissa had always handled disapproval with grace, but this was different, it was relentless and exhausting. She tried confiding in Ryan, but he often brushed it off, saying, "That's just how Mom is." Meanwhile, Janelle noticed a change in Melissa, how she laughed less, how she canceled plans more frequently, how she started apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Ethan, now working for an aerospace firm in New York, called her every weekend, asking if she was truly okay. She always said yes. She was married now. This was the life she signed up for. This was the cost of building a future with a powerful man. But late at night, when Ryan was asleep or away, she would walk into the guest room just to breathe. Her heart, once full, now fluttered like a trapped bird, restless and unsure if it had chosen the right sky. It began with the little things, sudden silences during dinner, a phone that never left Ryan's hand, the vanishing of inside jokes that used to make them laugh until they cried. Melissa started waking up to the cold side of the bed more often than not. Ryan's late nights, once excused by business deadlines, became the norm. She'd prepare his favorite garlic-roasted chicken and wait at the dining table long after the food went cold, staring at her phone until his brief texts rolled in, "Running late. Don't wait up." The warmth between them had dulled into something formal, cordial exchanges, small talk about meetings and weather, forced pecks on the cheek instead of kisses that meant something. When Melissa asked if everything was okay, Ryan would lean in, kiss her forehead, and say, "You're overthinking again." But she knew. There was a rift forming, invisible to outsiders but palpable in every interaction. Vanessa's name slipped into more and more conversations. Vanessa handled it. Vanessa already scheduled that. Vanessa thinks it's a good call. Melissa smiled through it, but inside her, questions churned like a storm about to make landfall. One afternoon, while folding laundry in their bedroom, Melissa picked up Ryan's tailored blazer to place it back in the wardrobe. As she slipped her hand into the inner pocket to smooth the lining, her fingers brushed something odd, a folded receipt from La Maison Noire, an upscale rooftop restaurant known for its romantic atmosphere and private booths. Dated last Thursday. A date night Ryan canceled, claiming an investor dinner in Philadelphia. Melissa's hand trembled as she stared at the time-stamped receipt. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably his. She said nothing, but her heart took a blow that no words could mend. She didn't want to believe it. She told herself there could be a logical explanation, but the quiet dread inside her whispered otherwise. That evening, she carefully placed the receipt in a small journal beneath her side table drawer. She had begun collecting silence, unanswered questions, and half-truths, and now, a physical token of it. That night, while Ryan lay beside her texting, Melissa turned away, eyes wide open in the dark, wondering how long she'd been sleeping next to a stranger wearing the face of the man she married. Ethan, ever watchful from a distance, decided to dig deeper. On a weekend visit to Boston, he trailed Ryan discreetly after spotting a location tag on Vanessa's Instagram story that matched one of Morepoint's ongoing sites. What he saw confirmed the knot in his gut. Ryan and Vanessa exiting a quiet lunch spot, not in business attire, not looking like co-workers. Ryan had his hand gently on her back, and they laughed in sync, like two people who shared more than office walls. Ethan snapped a photo from across the street, his heart sinking. He didn't rush to show Melissa. Not yet. Instead, he called Janelle. She needs to see it, But I need you to be there when she does, he said. Janelle agreed. They planned carefully, choosing a day when Melissa would be off work and home alone. But even before the photo surfaced, Melissa already felt it. The intuition of a woman who'd sacrificed her identity, dreams, and softness for a love that was now being pawned in secret. Her smile in public remained, but it was the kind people wore when they were too afraid of the truth, afraid that if they admitted what was breaking, they'd have nothing left to save. What Melissa didn't know was that the truth she feared had already started to shape her future in ways she couldn't imagine. The glass had cracked. The shatter was coming. The morning Melissa saw the faint double lines on the pregnancy test, her breath caught in her throat. She sat there on the edge of the bathtub, clutching the stick like a fragile secret, her heart thudding wildly in her chest. It wasn't planned, at least not now, but she had always dreamed of becoming a mother. In that moment, despite the growing emotional distance in her marriage, a flicker of hope bloomed inside her. Maybe this was the miracle that would pull them back together. Maybe this child would remind Ryan of the love that once held them tightly. She touched her flat stomach gently, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You're here." Instead of telling Ryan immediately, she decided to plan something special. A handwritten letter, paired with the same children's book he once gifted her during their courtship. She was going to surprise him over dinner, with soft music and candles, recapturing their once shared tenderness. But as the hours passed, her excitement was replaced with a looming fear. Would he be happy? Would he even care? Melissa never got the chance to tell him that night. Ryan canceled dinner again, citing a last-minute change in a zoning presentation. He didn't come home until after midnight, reeking faintly of Vanessa's perfume, the scent Melissa had grown painfully familiar with. She tucked the book and letter back into her drawer, saying nothing. The next morning, she watched him from the kitchen as he sipped his espresso and scrolled through his phone. "Anything new?" she asked softly. He glanced up briefly, muttering, "Same grind." Nothing changes. The irony stung. Later that week, she left her appointment at the clinic with ultrasound images clutched to her chest. 2 tiny sacks. She was carrying twins. The nurse smiled warmly, but Melissa sat still, absorbing the weight of it. 2 lives. 2 chances. 2 heartbeats pulsing inside her, reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. And yet, the one person who should have shared in her joy remained locked behind cold indifference. She drove home in silence, unsure how to bridge the widening canyon between her and the man she used to know. Unbeknownst to Melissa, Vanessa had already seen the pregnancy test. A day earlier, while dropping off documents at the penthouse during Ryan's absence, Vanessa noticed a crumpled pharmacy bag sticking out from the trash bin in the guest bathroom. Her curiosity got the better of her, and what she found sent a chill down her spine. Positive. The knowledge felt like a personal betrayal. Vanessa had spent months crafting her image next to Ryan, becoming his confidant, his emotional anchor, and now, in her mind, the rightful woman by his side. A baby, especially Melissa's, would complicate everything. That night, over drinks at a private rooftop bar, Vanessa casually mentioned children. Ryan chuckled, "Kids? Not now. Business is my baby." She watched his face carefully. No indication that he knew. That meant Melissa hadn't told him yet. Good. With venom masked behind her smile, Vanessa set her plan in motion, one that would ensure Melissa remained nothing more than a beautiful chapter in Ryan's past. What Vanessa hadn't counted on, however, was the power of a mother's love, the kind of strength that rises when everything else falls apart. And Melissa, though silent now, was beginning to see the shape of the storm approaching. Melissa sat alone on the edge of their king-sized bed one evening, her hand resting protectively over her small but growing belly, the ultrasound photo peeking from her journal on the nightstand. She had imagined this moment differently, Ryan beside her, his hand gently pressed to her abdomen, a look of wonder in his eyes as he imagined their future together. But reality was nothing like the dream. Days had turned into weeks, and Ryan still didn't know she was carrying not just 1, but 2 lives inside her. Every time she tried to share the news, something stopped her. Sometimes it was his coldness, other times it was his absence. More than once, she found herself rehearsing the conversation in her head only to be met with him walking in mid-phone call or rushing off to another late-night emergency. The words died in her throat. Fear began replacing hope, fear that even this news, even this miracle, would not be enough to awaken his heart again. And even deeper was the fear that he might already be giving it to someone else entirely. One night, while Ryan was in the shower, Melissa picked up his tablet from the nightstand to search for baby nursery designs. The screen lit up to a still open chat window, messages between him and Vanessa. Her breath caught. She hadn't intended to snoop, hadn't even thought twice, but there it was. The thread wasn't explicitly romantic, but the undertones were undeniable, subtle jokes only lovers understood, inside references, photos from her apartment, late night can't sleep without your voice texts, and one that sliced deep, she doesn't get you like I do. Melissa's hands trembled, her vision blurring with tears as the realization hit her with crushing finality. She scrolled no further. She placed the tablet down, stood quietly, and walked to the balcony. The cold night air bit at her skin, but it was the betrayal that made her shiver. She wrapped her arms around her belly and whispered, "It's not just me anymore." She knew then she couldn't stay silent forever. Something had to change. The next day, Melissa met with Janelle at a quiet cafe near her hospital. She handed her friend the ultrasound photo and broke down in tears, her voice fractured between sobs. Janelle, fierce as always, didn't ask for permission before speaking. "He's cheating, Mel. We both knew it. But now he's risking not just your heart, but your sanity. You're not just a wife anymore. You're a mother." Melissa nodded, but her expression was hollow. "I thought maybe this pregnancy would make things better." Janelle reached across the table, gripping her hand tightly. "You're not the one who needs fixing, Mel. He is." Meanwhile, Ethan, now equipped with the photo of Ryan and Vanessa at the rooftop restaurant, was losing patience. He wanted to confront Ryan, to expose him, to protect his sister. But Melissa begged for time. "Let me try one more time," she said, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "If he has any piece of the man I married left in him, he'll come clean." But deep down, a cold certainty was blooming in Melissa's gut. She was fighting a war with invisible weapons, and the person she was trying to save might already be long gone. Determined to reclaim some sense of normalcy, Melissa planned a family dinner at the penthouse. She wanted to create a moment, a bridge between the chaos and the calm, where both families could gather under one roof and hear the news she had kept hidden for too long. With trembling hands and hope still flickering in her chest, she handwrote invitations to Ethan, Janelle, her mother, and even Ryan's distant parents, Margaret and Charles. The evening was set with soft candlelight, a homemade spread of family recipes, and carefully arranged baby-themed table settings, tiny white booties beside each name card. Melissa wore a flowing pastel dress that gently hugged her growing belly. She checked her reflection in the mirror several times, practicing her smile, telling herself that tonight, things would change. Tonight, Ryan would see. Tonight, he would remember what they once had. But beneath her calm exterior was a war of emotions, a desperate need for validation, love, and perhaps even forgiveness, if only for still hoping. Guests began to arrive. Ethan arrived first, protective as always, carrying their mother gently in his arms and placing her at the head of the table. Janelle followed with a suspicious glance around the room, her eyes lingering on Ryan's absence. Margaret arrived next, her air thick with disapproval, commenting immediately on the scent of too much garlic and the oddly casual decor. Melissa gritted her teeth, welcoming her with a kiss on the cheek. Charles arrived late, checked his watch frequently, and barely acknowledged anyone outside of polite nods. Ryan, true to form, walked in 30 minutes after the scheduled time, not alone, but with Vanessa, dressed to dazzle in an emerald green dress that clung to her figure, lips curled in a smirk that made the room fall still. Melissa froze, holding a tray of lemon tarts, unable to process what she was seeing. Vanessa placed a hand on Ryan's arm and said sweetly, "Sorry we're late. Traffic was awful." Margaret gave a thin-lipped smile of approval. Janelle stood up, her chair screeching. "You brought her here," she barked. Melissa's hands trembled. She hadn't prepared for this. The dinner, what was supposed to be a celebration, descended into an emotionally violent affair. Vanessa dominated the conversation, sharing anecdotes about Ryan's work ethic and decisions Melissa had never even heard of. Margaret chimed in with backhanded comments like, "At least he has someone on his team who understands real estate dynamics," while sipping her wine with pointed calm. Melissa tried to interject, to bring the conversation back to family, to her pregnancy, but every effort was drowned out. Ryan didn't say much. He never defended Melissa, never corrected Vanessa, and worst of all, never noticed the quiet devastation on his wife's face. When Melissa finally stood up to make her announcement, her voice caught. "I'm pregnant. With twins," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something flicker across Ryan's face, surprise, maybe even regret, but it was gone in an instant. Vanessa raised her glass. "Well, that's unexpected." Margaret chuckled softly. "Let's hope they take after their father." Melissa looked around the table, realizing in that moment that she was surrounded by people who didn't see her, didn't care. And the man she had loved, the man she built a life with, sat beside another woman, silent. A dinner meant for unity had become the night she truly understood just how far she'd been pushed out of her own story. After the disastrous family dinner, Melissa retreated into silence, wrapping herself in her duties at the hospital and prenatal appointments, trying to find solace in the gentle thumps of the twins growing inside her. Though her spirit felt increasingly fractured, she masked it with grace. With Janelle's support, she began preparing for her baby shower, an event that was originally meant to be a surprise, but Melissa chose to be involved just to distract herself. Janelle, fierce as ever, took the reins, organizing guest lists, selecting a warm color palette of peach and ivory, and booking a cozy private hall near Boston Harbor. "We're going to remind you who you are," Janelle had declared, brushing Melissa's hair one morning like they were teenagers again. Ethan agreed to fly back from New York to help set up, determined to surround his sister with the kind of love she hadn't felt in months. For a while, planning the shower gave Melissa something to hold on to, something separate from Ryan, from Margaret's cruelty, and from Vanessa's looming presence. It was her celebration. Her babies. Her moment. But peace has a cruel way of never lasting long. One night, while Ryan was away on yet another conference, Melissa decided to clean out the media cabinet in the guest room, a chore she'd been putting off for months. Behind a stack of old photo albums and board games, she found Ryan's forgotten tablet. Out of habit, she powered it on, intending to clear storage and donate it. It didn't require a passcode. The screen blinked to life, and what appeared shocked her to her core. There was a file folder titled Client Files, but instead of business contracts, she found photos of Vanessa in robes, selfies taken in the same suite Ryan had once taken her to for their first anniversary. The timestamp confirmed they were taken during weekends Ryan claimed to be out of town. And then the messages, intimate, flirtatious, undeniable. "You looked so beautiful in my shirt last night. Wish you could sleep beside me every night." She doesn't even notice anymore. Melissa felt her hands go cold, her vision tumbled, the room spinning around her. She stared at the screen, frozen, not crying, not moving, just breaking slowly from the inside out. She sat in that guest room for over an hour, clutching the tablet like it was a weapon and a wound all at once. There were no more doubts, no more excuses to make. The man she had built a life with, sacrificed dreams for, stood by in silence as others disrespected her, and now she understood why. He had emotionally exited their marriage long ago. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to burn it all to the ground. But then, the twins kicked, tiny flutters reminding her that she was carrying life, and this pain would not be the legacy she handed to her daughters. She deleted nothing, copied everything, and backed it up onto her personal drive. Then, she placed the tablet back exactly where she found it. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't crumble in front of him. No. Melissa would smile at the baby shower. She would wear her peach dress, hold her belly with pride, and let them think she was blind. But inside her, something sharp had awakened. Something quiet, calculating, and strong. The version of Melissa that let herself be pushed aside had died in that guest room. What rose in her place was a woman preparing for war, and the battlefield would begin with the one event she once dreamed of, the baby shower. The morning of the baby shower arrived with a clear blue sky and a soft breeze that whispered promises of peace. Melissa stood before her mirror in a flowing peach dress that gently embraced her rounded belly. Her curls were pinned with delicate baby's breath, her lips painted the soft pink of quiet strength. The private event hall had been transformed into a garden of warmth, ivory linens, floating floral centerpieces, balloons spelling double the blessing, and tables filled with close friends, colleagues, and well-wishers. Janelle buzzed around with a clipboard, ensuring every moment was perfect, while Ethan waited outside, greeting guests with his signature protective charm. Melissa tried to steady her breathing. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, the grief, and the loneliness, she would smile today. She would celebrate her daughters with dignity. This wasn't about Ryan anymore. It was about her. It was about them. Or so she thought. The crowd quieted as she entered the hall, applause erupting like a wave. Flashbulbs popped, friends embraced her, and for a short, sweet time, Melissa allowed herself to bask in the moment. That was until the double doors burst open mid-event, and in came Ryan, uninvited, unwelcome, and not alone. Vanessa followed him in, dressed in white, as though mocking the sanctity of the day. A hush fell across the room as whispers began circulating. Melissa froze mid-conversation, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs. Vanessa strutted up to her with a wine glass in hand, smiled with the sharpness of a blade, and before anyone could react, splashed the deep red wine across Melissa's dress and belly. Gasps echoed across the hall. Time stopped. And then, Ryan, standing behind Vanessa, uttered the words that carved themselves into Melissa's soul forever. Take that rubbish elsewhere. You're not needed here anymore. His voice wasn't angry, it was dismissive, detached. Lillian let out a broken cry from her wheelchair. Janelle lunged forward, but Ethan caught her arm, his jaw clenched in disbelief. Melissa didn't move. The red spread down her dress like a wound. Her hands cradled her stomach protectively, her eyes never leaving Ryan's face. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He turned and walked toward the bar as if nothing had happened. Melissa stood alone, soaked in humiliation, surrounded by silence that screamed louder than a stadium. For a moment, the room blurred, the colors, the lights, the faces. But then, something inside her clicked. She straightened her back, wiped the wine from her belly with the edge of her shawl, and slowly raised her chin. I will not break here, she whispered under her breath. With trembling grace, she turned to the guests, offered a tight-lipped smile, and whispered to Janelle, let's leave. Janelle rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her, shielding her from camera flashes as they exited the hall. Ethan followed closely behind, fury boiling in his veins. Outside, the sun was still shining, indifferent to the storm that had just unfolded. As Melissa sat in the car, tears silently streaking down her cheeks, she looked down at her ruined dress. It no longer mattered. What mattered were the two lives inside her. What mattered was her reclaiming her dignity. That moment, though devastating, became her line in the sand. Ryan had shattered every piece of their history with a single sentence. But what he didn't realize was that he had just freed the strongest version of Melissa Anderson the world had yet to see. The drive back from the baby shower was painfully quiet. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, Janelle sat in the back holding Melissa's hand, and Melissa stared blankly out the window, the hum of traffic a dull background to the war raging in her chest. She didn't speak, not when they pulled into Ethan's apartment complex, not when he helped her out of the car, not even when Janelle gently wiped her face with a warm cloth. Her once radiant aura was dimmed, hollowed by the betrayal she had endured publicly, viciously. The wine had been washed from her skin, but the humiliation lingered like smoke in her lungs. Ethan paced the living room, struggling between the urge to press charges and the need to respect Melissa's silence. You can't just let this go, Mel, he finally snapped. He doesn't get to destroy you like that. Not in front of everyone. Not while you're carrying his children. Melissa, curled up on the couch with a blanket shielding her bump, looked up slowly. He's already gone, she whispered. What's left to fight for? The weight of that truth silenced even Janelle. The next morning, Melissa sat across from a soft-spoken therapist Ethan had arranged. The woman's eyes were kind, and she didn't push Melissa to speak, just sat there in gentle silence until Melissa's tears finally came. It wasn't just the betrayal or the public humiliation, it was the erosion of trust, the collapse of a future she had imagined since the first day Ryan kissed her forehead and called her home. She wept for the nights spent waiting, the moments she second-guessed herself, the love she poured into someone who never planned to catch her. After the session, she walked through Ethan's apartment slowly, absorbing how different it felt, calmer, quieter, sincere. She found comfort in the mundane, the smell of fresh laundry, the sound of Janelle chopping vegetables in the kitchen, her mother humming softly from the guest room. That night, for the first time in weeks, Melissa slept soundly, her hand resting over her belly, her heart beginning to whisper the faintest melody of survival. She wasn't okay yet, but she was alive, and that was a start. By the end of the week, Melissa made a quiet decision. She drafted a letter to Ryan, brief, unemotional, and final. No pleas, no tears, no explanations. Just a note outlining that she was moving out permanently, taking time for herself, and had no intention of returning. She made no mention of custody, finances, or confrontation. She left it all up to the lawyers. Ethan delivered the letter personally, returning with no words, just a nod that said it's done. Melissa blocked Ryan's number. She deactivated their shared calendar, unlinked their banking app, and removed his emergency contact from her medical records. Her heart still ached, but she refused to let it define her. Janelle helped her shop for baby clothes, and Ethan turned the second bedroom into a nursery, 2 tiny cribs, painted clouds on the ceiling, and walls the color of soft sunrise. Melissa began journaling, capturing every flutter and kick, documenting the story of strength she would one day read to her daughters. The world didn't pause for her pain, but she no longer expected it to. From that moment on, Melissa Anderson chose herself, not out of bitterness, but out of love. Love for the women her daughters would become. Love for the woman she was slowly rediscovering. The labor came unexpectedly, in the quiet stillness of an autumn evening. Melissa had been folding tiny onesies in the nursery, the room aglow with a soft amber light, when the first contraction hit like a wave crashing into her spine. At first, she dismissed it as just another false alarm. She'd been having Braxton Hicks for a week now. But then came the second, sharper and closer, and the unmistakable sensation that something irreversible had begun. Janelle, who had just returned with groceries, dropped the bag and sprang into action while Ethan grabbed the hospital bag they had prepacked and helped her into the car. Melissa gripped Janelle's hand the entire drive, her breathing short, but her mind calm, strangely calm, like the center of a hurricane. She didn't think of Ryan. She didn't think of Vanessa. Her world had narrowed to the 2 heartbeats within her and the love that surrounded her now. When they wheeled her into the maternity wing and the nurses recognized her from her time as a pediatric nurse, they moved with swift compassion. The moment had arrived. She was about to become a mother. Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. The delivery room was filled with urgency, but also serenity. Ethan remained just outside, pacing and praying, while Janelle held Melissa's hand inside the room, whispering strength into her ear with every push. Tears streamed down Janelle's face as the first cry filled the room, then a second. Identical daughters, born mere minutes apart. Mila and Maya. Melissa cried as they were placed on her chest, their tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers. It was the most profound moment of her life, an intersection of heartbreak, healing, and the beginning of something entirely new. She gazed down at their perfect faces, feeling a surge of emotion so overwhelming it left her breathless. The pain of betrayal, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, all of it dimmed beneath the warmth of her daughter's skin against hers. She was no longer the woman pleading for love. She was the mother of 2 radiant lives, and her story, her real story, was just beginning to be rewritten. Later, in the quiet of her hospital room, Melissa sat upright, cradling both girls in her arms while Ethan filmed with trembling hands and Janelle adjusted their tiny blankets. Lillian, lucid and emotional, entered the room in a wheelchair and kissed both her granddaughters with reverent gentleness. "You've done something sacred, Mel," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. There was no grand fanfare, no messages from Ryan, no knock at the door bearing apologies or flowers. And Melissa didn't expect one. She looked down at Mila and Maya, identical yet already distinct, Mila with her tiny furrowed brow, Maya with her content pout, and felt a sense of finality. She whispered promises to them, of safety, of truth, of never allowing anyone to make them feel invisible. That night, wrapped in soft white hospital blankets and surrounded by those who truly loved her, Melissa wrote their names in her journal for the first time. No longer did she feel the need to mourn what she lost. These girls weren't just her daughters. They were her redemption. They were her miracle. They were her reason to never look back again. Back at Morepoint Developments, the office dynamics had shifted dramatically. With Melissa gone and Ryan's conscience buried beneath pride and distraction, Vanessa took swift control of his orbit. She was no longer the assistant sitting quietly by his side. She had evolved into something more formidable, stepping into board meetings with tailored suits, strategic charm, and a subtle possessiveness that grew more visible by the day. She redecorated Ryan's office space, silenced staff who questioned her authority, and began hosting investor mixers under her own name. The team, once loyal to Melissa and fond of her grounded presence, found themselves walking on eggshells, unsure whether to align with Vanessa's growing dominance or risk subtle retaliation. Ryan, for the most part, remained unaware or uninterested. He was deep in a whirlwind of mergers, zoning battles, and property rebranding. To him, Vanessa was efficient, ruthless, and exactly what he needed to keep his empire from collapsing under the weight of personal scandal. What he failed to realize was that she wasn't helping him build, she was replacing him, one whisper, one signature, one power play at a time. Vanessa had tasted proximity to power, and now she wanted more. The baby shower debacle, in her mind, had solidified Melissa's exit from Ryan's life. She had made a spectacle of her dominance, and Ryan's silence had been her permission slip to ascend. But business wasn't as forgiving as scandal. Investors who had once been eager to back Ryan's vision began expressing concern. Deals started slipping through fingers as whispers about his personal life leaked through elite circles. One of the company's largest partners, Farrow and Goldstone Holdings, began withdrawing from their upcoming waterfront project, citing unstable leadership direction. Vanessa tried to cover it up, hosted a lavish event, pushed a fresh PR campaign, but the cracks were spreading faster than she anticipated. Ryan, still unaware of the full picture, began snapping during meetings, barking at staff, skipping briefings. When his longtime CFO, Peter Langston, tendered his resignation without notice, Vanessa dismissed it as disloyalty. But deep down, she sensed it, the tide was turning, and it wasn't in her favor. Ryan started noticing the isolation, though he never voiced it. His once busy phone buzzed less, his calendar thinned out, and trusted allies seemed distant, their smiles more rehearsed. Vanessa remained present, offering soothing words and calculated touches, but even those began to feel suffocating. One evening, as he reviewed a rejected proposal he hadn't realized had been sent under Vanessa's signature, he felt the first ripple of unease. He stared at the page, realizing she had made decisions, major ones, without him. He confronted her in private, asking bluntly, "Who gave you the right to represent me?" Vanessa didn't flinch. She smiled, slow and cold. "You did, Ryan. Every time you let me." The words echoed like a slap. He had built his world so high, convinced he was untouchable, and now the foundations were shifting beneath him. Still, he didn't reach for Melissa. He didn't try to undo what had been done. Instead, he poured another drink, stared out the window of his high-rise office, and wondered, too late, when exactly he had stopped being in control of his own life. Melissa stood in front of the mirror in her new home, smaller than the penthouse, but filled with warmth and light. The girls, now 4 months old, were napping peacefully in their matching bassinets, soft lullabies humming from the speaker in the corner. She had spent the last few weeks healing, not just physically, but emotionally. With Ethan's unwavering support and Janelle's fierce love, Melissa had begun to rediscover herself. But what ignited her spirit once again was a serendipitous encounter with a pediatric neurosurgeon named Dr. Ramon Leclerc. Tall, brilliant, and soft-spoken with a French-American accent and a gentle demeanor, Ramon had been one of the physicians assisting during her complicated delivery. Their paths crossed again when he recognized her name from a file on a charity board he chaired. They met for coffee after a routine postnatal checkup, and she told him about her long-abandoned dream, the willow nest. She thought it silly to even mention it, but Ramon leaned in, eyes lit with interest, and simply said, "Let's build it." Within weeks, things moved faster than Melissa had ever imagined. With Ramon's silent investment and access to networks she could never reach alone, she secured permits, a building in need of restoration, and a small team of specialists who shared her vision. The Willow Nest was not just a therapy center, it was a sanctuary for children and parents navigating developmental delays, trauma, or neurological conditions. Melissa poured her soul into the project, working late hours while juggling motherhood with the strength only a woman who had survived betrayal and humiliation could possess. Ramon never overstepped. He was supportive, professional, and refreshingly respectful. He saw her not as someone broken, but as someone reborn. The opening date was set, and even local media began catching wind of the center's uniqueness. The story of a single mother rising from scandal to open something so vital captured hearts. Still, Melissa declined interviews. This wasn't about publicity. It was about purpose. And the more she built, the less she thought of Ryan, not because he didn't matter, but because he no longer controlled the chapters ahead. The grand opening of the Willow Nest was a quiet affair, intentionally so. Melissa didn't invite high-profile guests or celebrities. Instead, she welcomed the parents of her first 10 registered children, the therapists who took a chance on her vision, and the small circle who had carried her through the storm. Janelle stood proudly at her side in a sunflower yellow dress. Ethan held both Mila and Maya in his arms, and Ramon watched from a distance, his eyes reflecting pride but never claiming ownership. When Melissa stepped up to cut the ribbon, she didn't cry. She smiled. Not the broken smile she had once forced herself to wear, but a real one, rooted in peace. Behind her, on a glass wall, was a hand-painted quote she had chosen carefully: "Where hope feels heavy, let healing begin." The media called it a redemption story, but Melissa didn't see it that way. This wasn't about redemption. It was about becoming the woman she was always meant to be, one who didn't need a man's name or validation to change the world. Her daughters would grow up walking the halls of a place their mother built from ashes, and one day, they would know the full story. But for now, they were safe. She was strong. And the future was hers. It began with a handshake and a name. Melissa had just wrapped up a consultation with a new donor prospect, Mr. Dean Rutherford, a philanthropic tech mogul known for funding child-centric initiatives across the East Coast. He toured the Willow Nest with fascination, commenting on its warmth and how deeply personal the design felt. As they stepped into her office to finalize paperwork, Dean leaned back in the leather chair and studied her thoughtfully. "Forgive me, but your last name, Anderson. It used to be Moore, didn't it?" Melissa stiffened, her fingers freezing on the clipboard. "Yes, briefly," she answered cautiously. Dean smiled, tapping his chin. "Thought so. You were married to Ryan Moore. I met him years ago. He was trying to pitch me a waterfront tower. I declined." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I didn't trust his partner. Vanessa Blake. She seemed like she was running more than just numbers." Melissa blinked. "You knew Vanessa?" Dean nodded slowly. "Only by reputation. But your name being attached here? Now that carries weight. You've done something real, Melissa." That moment shifted the air around her. The past had unknowingly followed her into her future, but instead of threatening it, it validated her. Later that evening, as Melissa rocked Mila to sleep in the nursery, Janelle burst in with her phone in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mel, you're not going to believe this." She turned the screen, showing an online forum for urban investors. A thread had exploded, anonymous whistleblowers discussing Morepoint's rapid decline and referencing a therapy center supposedly linked to Ryan's ex-wife. Words like elegance, vision, and ethical leadership were being used. Melissa scrolled in silence, her heart pounding. One post in particular caught her eye. "If the Willow Nest is what she built after leaving him, I can only imagine what he lost." The comments poured in with speculation about her identity, how she kept such a launch under wraps, and how different her leadership style was compared to Vanessa's cold ambition. Melissa was stunned. She never wanted attention. But it was there, and oddly, it felt earned. She wasn't a side note anymore. She was the headline. The impact was immediate. Bookings for the Willow Nest doubled within 48 hours. Journalists began reaching out, requesting interviews. Ramon shielded her as best he could, but even he couldn't deny that her story was becoming a quiet phenomenon. Melissa declined all press. Her focus remained on the children, the families, and the mission. But behind the scenes, the revelation began to ripple through Boston's tight-knit business circles, and it inevitably reached Ryan. He read the same articles. Heard the same murmurs. Investors who had once shaken his hand with certainty now did so with guarded expressions. During one particularly tense boardroom meeting, a potential client casually said, "Your ex seems to have created something beautiful." Must sting, huh? Ryan didn't reply. He couldn't. For the first time, he was seeing Melissa not as the woman he left, but as the woman he'd underestimated. The world was watching now, but Melissa wasn't performing. She was thriving, and Ryan, once at the center of her world, had become nothing more than a footnote in her transformation. Ryan sat alone in his penthouse living room, staring at the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but for the first time in years, he wasn't admiring the skyline he'd once helped shape. The walls around him, adorned with abstract art and steel accents, suddenly felt cold and foreign. Vanessa had gone silent for hours after yet another heated argument, this time over a botched investor call she had handled without his knowledge. The trust between them, once forged in secrecy and seduction, had deteriorated into a silent war of control. But what haunted Ryan wasn't just the business unraveling, it was the headlines, the whispers, and most of all, the photo of Melissa smiling as she opened the doors of the willow nest, her twins in her arms and Janelle and Ethan standing proudly beside her. No PR agency had orchestrated that. No press stunt. It was genuine. Authentic. The kind of success built not on manipulation, but on heart and purpose. And Ryan had never even seen it coming. He could have reached out, called, emailed, shown up. But pride is a stubborn beast, and Ryan wore his like armor. He told himself she didn't need him. That she had moved on. That he'd done her a favor by letting go. But deep down, guilt gnawed at him. Not because Melissa had succeeded without him, but because he had never believed she could. He remembered the night he dismissed her dream, brushing off the willow nest as small-scale and unscalable. Now it was being hailed as one of the most innovative child wellness centers in the region. He had traded a woman with vision, loyalty, and grace for someone who mimicked ambition but lacked soul. He remembered Melissa's touch, the way she used to trace circles on his shoulder when he couldn't sleep. How she used to pack him notes in his suit pockets before big presentations. He hadn't just betrayed her. He'd discarded something irreplaceable. And now, no apology, no grand gesture, no bouquet of remorse could rewrite the story. One evening, Ryan received a private invitation to a medical gala hosted by one of the Willow Nest's major partners. Her name was on the honorees list, Melissa Anderson, visionary leader in child development. He didn't RSVP. He didn't ask for a +1. He simply showed up in a charcoal suit and stood at the back of the room, unnoticed, watching as Melissa took the stage. She looked radiant, not polished like a socialite, but powerful in her authenticity. Her speech was humble and warm, filled with anecdotes about her patients, her daughters, and the team who helped her build the center from the ground up. She never once mentioned him. And that hurt more than if she had. He was invisible in her narrative, erased from the chapters that mattered most. As the applause roared and she stepped down to embrace Ethan and Janelle, Ryan quietly turned and walked out before anyone could spot him. Pride kept his mouth shut, but regret tightened around his chest like a noose. He had lost her. And she hadn't just moved on, she had soared. The crisp air of early spring wrapped gently around the small crowd gathered outside Primrose Academy for Orientation Day. Children skipped between tables of colorful crafts, balloons bobbed in the breeze, and proud parents trailed close behind their little ones. Melissa stood near the registration booth, her hair swept into a soft bun, a light cardigan draped over her shoulders. Mila and Maya clutched her hands tightly, wearing matching pink dresses with embroidered butterflies, eager, curious, and blissfully unaware of the history tied to this moment. Ramon, standing a few feet away, was flipping through forms with quiet focus, pausing only to smile and wave at the girls, who lit up every time he looked their way. Melissa had made peace with their bond, slowly, gently. He had never asked for more than she could give, never pressured her for love she wasn't ready to name. He had simply stayed. Patient. Supportive. Steady. Just as a few parents began introducing themselves, Melissa heard a familiar voice that froze her where she stood. Ryan. His voice hadn't changed, low, authoritative, casual. Excuse me. Mila. Maya, he called, his tone uncertain. The twins turned instinctively, recognizing the man who had once briefly visited under legal obligation but never truly stayed. Melissa stiffened as they ran toward him, not with the uninhibited joy of love, but with the curiosity of children connecting a vague memory to a real face. He knelt, smiling faintly, brushing their curls back, murmuring something only they heard. Melissa approached calmly, her heart steady, no longer shaken by the sight of the man who had broken her. Ryan rose slowly, eyes meeting hers. There was no anger, no apology, just a strange, lingering sorrow in his gaze. "They've grown," he said softly. "They're beautiful." Melissa nodded. "Yes, they are." He glanced toward Ramon, who was now walking over with quiet awareness, and the girls instinctively ran to him, wrapping their arms around his legs. Ryan watched, jaw clenched, but said nothing. There was a long silence between them, standing under the pale sun, years and memories stretched taut in the space. "You look well," Ryan offered. Melissa's smile was brief but polite. "I am." He nodded, as if that answer alone was the closure he had come seeking, but not enough to fix what was already gone. "Take care of them," he said. "Always," Melissa replied, her voice laced with iron and grace. As Ryan turned and walked away, he didn't look back. Melissa didn't either. She reached down, took her daughter's hands, and walked forward toward the school, with Ramon beside her and the future ahead. That brief encounter had not reopened wounds, it had sealed them. Melissa felt no longing, no revenge, only finality. She had once begged for Ryan's presence. Now, she walked away from it like a woman who finally understood her worth. Some stories don't end with apologies. Some just end with dignity, silence, and strength. Sunlight spilled gently through the tall arched windows of the new Willow Nest expansion building, casting soft golden rays across the polished floors and pastel murals. Children's laughter echoed down the halls as therapists guided them through morning routines, and volunteers organized reading corners with quiet dedication. Melissa stood just outside the newly finished sensory room, clipboard in hand, watching it all unfold with a sense of surreal fulfillment. The second location of her therapy center had opened quietly in a neighboring city, no press coverage, no media blitz, just an open door and a promise of healing. Behind her, Mila and Maya giggled in matching overalls, playing with finger puppets while waiting for their mother to finish her tour. Melissa had grown into her new life, not as a woman defined by what she lost, but by what she built from it. Each wall, each corridor of Willow Nest, echoed the strength she had cultivated from heartbreak. She no longer walked in shadows. She led in light. Outside the building, a modest ribbon-cutting ceremony had gathered a small crowd, families whose children were enrolled, donors, and staff who had watched Melissa rise over the past year. Ethan stood proudly beside her, taking photos and nudging her to smile wider. Janelle wore her signature bold lipstick and whispered sass into Melissa's ear between speeches, making her laugh when the tension built. Ramon, now both a business partner and something quietly more, watched her with a respect that had nothing to do with admiration and everything to do with love earned, not forced. When Melissa stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice was steady, her eyes clear. "This place exists because healing matters," she said. "Because children deserve spaces that see them fully, and parents deserve support, not judgment. This is for every family that ever felt alone. You're not." Applause filled the space, but Melissa didn't speak for praise. She spoke from peace, a peace she had fought for, birthed, and protected like her daughters. After the ceremony, Melissa walked hand in hand with Mila and Maya through the garden behind the center. The sky was endless above them, blue and wide, as the girls picked wildflowers and chattered about their upcoming birthday party. Melissa knelt beside them, adjusting their curls, listening as they excitedly debated whether they wanted strawberry or chocolate cake. In that moment, with soft grass beneath her knees and sunlight warming her skin, she felt the final piece of her heart settle into place. She no longer thought about Ryan, not with anger, not even with sadness. He had been a chapter, a lesson, a necessary fracture that led her to this wholeness. Her daughters didn't ask about him anymore, and she didn't offer. They were surrounded by love, by truth, by the kind of stability Melissa had once begged for and now created on her own. She stood, scooped them into her arms, and whispered, "This is our forever." The wind swayed gently around them, as if in agreement. And with every step back toward the center, toward home, Melissa knew, this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. A beginning she had written for herself, with strength, grace, and the kind of love that never needed permission to thrive. The end.